Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the November 9, 2017 meeting of the City County Planning Board. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Today's meeting is being broadcast live by Winston-Salem TV digital media. It'll be rebroadcast at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, again at 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Our first order of business today is the consent agenda. These are items which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For our public hearings today, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one will be allowed to speak unless a planning board member asks a question. For general use district zoning, the board must consider all the uses allowed in the district. Therefore, the petitioner may not refer to a specific use. For special use zoning, however, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the property and give specific details on how the site would be developed. Items under Section B of our agenda require final approval either by the city, county, or county commissioners. As such, votes taken today will go to them for their consideration. If you're addressing the board today, before you begin your remarks, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. First order of business is approval of the minutes of the October 12, 23, and 26 meetings. Paul, I believe you got an addition or a correction.
Yes. Just draw your attention to the minutes of the October 12th public hearing meeting. And I spoke with Mr. Bryan, and he wanted to be sure that the motion on the case having to do with the enclave, which is on the 6th page of your minutes. The pages aren't numbered there, but if you page back to the 6th page, that has the two bulleted points at the top of the page, and then the motion from Mr. Bryan. And although we described generally in those bullets what was happening, he wanted to make sure that the actual the exact wording of how the condition that was originally proposed, how that wording would change embedded in the motion, since that was his motion. So you'll see there with strike through and with underline the change in that. So we're striking through the parentheses in that earlier bullet that and the above noted stormwater pond conditions, because we're putting the language directly into the motion there, and then we're adding the words. And with the following revision to proposed condition A under prior to issuance of grading permit, strike the words staff change approval at minimum and may require a. Those words would be struck so that the last words of that sentence of the condition A would read, or close proximity to adjacent residentially zoned land shall require a site plan amendment. So that makes it clear what the exact intent of the motion was. And just to let you know, and you'll be glad to know, that the actual condition as it went forward to City Council in this case reflected exactly that. So that would be a revision to the minutes.
Okay. Are there any other additions or corrections? Yes,
one other. In C, special use permit of the October 12th public hearing, we were talking about the special use permit for Twin City Bible Church for transmission tower. Under the work session, it talks about a discussion by the planning board. It mentioned some other discussion, but it neglected to mention that I requested of the cell phone tower representative of was there any consideration of putting the cell tower in the steeple of the church. And that isn't reflected in the minutes here, and I'd like it to be reflected. I think there's one other thing that it says, is there an existing driveway? It was under the discussion, and that was mentioned, but it wasn't mentioned the other portion.
Okay, that can be
if the board would like that, we can add it.
You want
Yep,
to,
move
okay with that?
approval, yep, with revisions.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
I had one more.
Okay.
One more.
All right.
Sorry.
We'll vote on this and then we'll do yours. Okay, so we have a motion to make that one change. All in favor? Any opposed? Okay. Now, Ms. Donegan?
On the work session minutes, under Part 3, this is really a point of clarification because the language is a little bit vague, and I just wanted to make sure that it was clear what the what we had asked staff to look into. And it says here that Mr. Bennett had explained the lighting standards amendment, and the board discussed whether the amendment should include lighting standards for such uses as outdoor recreation and stadiums. And I just wanted to clarify that the discussion wasn't just whether we should include these standards, because the standards were already included in what we were looking at. It's just that the discussion, as I recall, had to do with whether those standards should be brought back to us with some changes where there was greater specificity on those standards. Am I remembering that correctly?
I took that as direction to us to look at these, and we will bring you, we're not going to bring you back a finished ordinance for public hearing. We'll be bringing you back an update to this briefing so that you can decide whether it's in a place where you want to have a public hearing.
Right. I'm just saying that there is a little bit of vagueness as to whether we were talking about whether those standards should be included at all when you read that sentence. And what I wanted to make clear was not that the discussion was not whether or not to include them, but what standards they should be.
Okay. Would you suggest some wording changes to that?
As well as
what the specifics of the standard will be, or something like that.
for outdoor lighting for outdoor recreation in stadiums. Because I think the discussion was that we weren't completely happy with what was being proposed and that we wanted to consider some alternatives.
So you just want staff to bring us something back to work session to look at? Is that
Yes.
what you asked, the intent, I guess? So, and that,
Maybe as well as a desire for the amendment to include lighting standards for such uses as outdoor recreation in stadiums.
Right, 'cause I agree, we wanted more detail than what was provided in that draft.
okay, so that's Ms. Donegan's. You seconding that, Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Any discussion on that? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. So we'll make those corrections. Any other changes, additions to any of the minutes? With these three changes, anyone care to make a motion?
Move approval.
Second, Mr. Bryan. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now calling on Aaron King for consent agenda.
All right, first case is item B1, is zoning docket W 3351, and this is a request to rezone about 6,500ths of an acre from RS9 to general business limited use. You can see the site there in yellow. It's on the north side of Salisbury Ridge Road, west of Park Boulevard. You may remember we just recently had a rezoning case to the north of this for the Marketplace Mall, and that request was to go from highway business to general business limited use. And that request was approved by City Council this past Monday night, and you can see that reflected on your zoning map there to the north. What's before you today, again, is for GBL. It includes the same list of proposed uses that were included on the zoning case that Council approved Monday night. There is a condition for this piece of property that would prohibit any buildings to be located here. What this request is for is to establish a second access point in and out of the Marketplace Mall property. And so when our staff reviewed this, we compared it to the area plan, and the South Central area plan actually has very specific language that recommends providing a pedestrian and a vehicular connection from Salisbury Ridge Road into the Marketplace Mall Shopping Center. So our staff feels this request is consistent with the recommendations of the area plan, and we would recommend approval of this GBL request.
No one has signed up. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Discussion, yes.
Yes. Are there any special considerations that have to be made if this is used for tractor trailers or anything like that coming out of Marketplace Mall onto Salisbury Ridge?
The only thing I would
DOT
say,
already look at that?
well, nobody submitted any plans for it yet, so that idea hasn't been explored. But I would assume that if that's the intent of Marketplace Mall, then they would certainly want to design a drive that would accommodate that and have adequate turning radiuses and things of that nature to support those kinds of vehicles. But to my knowledge, no plan has been submitted for any review for that.
Has DOT taken a look at that in terms of the traffic on Salisbury Ridge and
Not to
what
my
may
knowledge,
change?
again, because no plan has been submitted to react to.
It is a minor thoroughfare with excess capacity.
Yeah, it seems to not be
And the
that.
driveways would not line up, but it's actually a positive offset, so that's good for left turning movements.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions?
Oh, I just want to make sure that there were other conditions that were mentioned, that those are part of what we're voting?
There are. I didn't go through them in detail, but yes, there's a signage condition, a condition to try to save that poplar tree that I think is located in the middle there. Again, a condition for no buildings to be located on this property, and a condition to try to include a very steep grade going down from Salisbury Ridge Road. So we have a condition, I think it's structured to the effect that if it's practical, we've asked the applicant to provide a pedestrian connection down as long as they can meet ADA requirements. We know there are going to be some challenges there, so as long as it's reasonable, we would ask them to do that. Those conditions are included, yes.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? We have a motion for approval. Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B2, zoning docket W3352, and this is a request to rezone about 27 acres from limited industrial to general industrial special use for the two uses of borrow site and dirt storage. And you can see the property there in yellow. It's on the north side of Ziegler Road, and it kind of abuts US 52 on its eastern boundary there. And this project will be used in conjunction with the city's sanitary landfill that's south of Ziegler Road. So, and looking at the map, again, you see the subject property in yellow, zoned LI. The GIS zoning that's directly south of it is basically used for the same use that what they're asking for today, the dirt storage and the ability to take dirt to and from that site over to the landfill as needed. So approval of this would allow essentially an expansion of the GIS that you already have on Ziegler Road to the north. It would allow that operation to expand. I will say while we're on the slide, this in no way is an expansion of the landfill. There will be no trash buried on this site at all. It's, again, to move dirt back and forth between the sites. This is the site plan that's been submitted with this request, and to get you oriented, 52 is kind of over on the left-hand side of this image, and Ziegler Road's kind of located here. And again, no building is proposed here. It's really just the ability to store and stockpile dirt and to borrow dirt from this site to take back across to the landfill. This is a second sheet that kind of shows you how the two sites would work in conjunction. So the existing is the GIS zoning that's currently in place. It's currently being used for that purpose. What's shown in green is the proposed GIS zoning that would allow for the same use. No new driveway connections are included with this. They would utilize the existing driveway onto Ziegler Road, and if you can kind of see through the shading, they would access the property in green through the existing site right here. Staff has reviewed this. The area plan does recommend industrial zoning for this site, and staff would recommend approval of this GIS zoning request.
Anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Little. Any discussion?
Mr. Lee, you mean?
Yeah, Aaron, the past history on this site, explain that to me.
On the
There've been other requests and decisions, and there was one denial.
so I think what you're referencing, that denial is.
But it was a separate plot, right?
Gary, I might lean on you. I know that's in your histories there. I'm not sure if you remember what exactly that was referring to.
And we don't have the Grassy Creek Coalition here, so I'm assuming it's not the same issues.
So the 2295 case 2295, it was approved in I guess June of '99, and Planning Board I guess recommended denial of one tract and approval of the other.
Yes,
I'm gonna go way back in my memory because this was shortly after I arrived here, one of the first cases we had. But I believe this was for the overall landfill, and there was a larger area that was originally proposed. And I think what happened as a result of the public input on that is that the portion one of the areas got pulled back some. So I think that's probably, I'm taking a guess here using my memory after 18, 19 years, is that would be the piece that was left out at that time.
So it was denied the same zoning that we're giving it today?
I don't know if it was
that probably
this. This
included
was south
sanitary
across
landfill.
Ziegler Road. So
they left sanitary in there?
Well, that case included sanitary landfill, that 231 acres. So
that
this
was
case
the
does
big
not.
zoning for the sanitary landfill there, expansion.
So that being the case, if Winston-Salem's needs don't equal out here in terms of recycling and other types of management of waste, if our waste continues, is moving it to this zoning a step toward turning that into a sanitary? Or what would have to happen for that to occur?
They would have to come back through the rezoning process and add the use sanitary landfill, so they would have to go through.
But they wouldn't have to change the zoning overall, just the use, right?
GIS would work. Again, they would have to come in with a new site plan, new uses, and a whole shooting match. So it would essentially be a new rezoning, yes.
Right. Well,
But, I mean, if you got some more questions, you want to get more into the long-term landfill thing, Jan McHarg here is from City County Utilities.
I would love to, but we've got a big audience here, and so I'll hesitate myself. So maybe somebody else does.
I did have a few questions. And it had to do with the access. There is that one point across Ziegler Road where the trucks would go from the borrow pit to the landfill, right? I was just wanting to make sure, I mean, on the site plan it said that the position of the road might change, and I just wanted to make sure that that access point was not proposed to ever be changed from Ziegler.
So the access point that's shown here under the arrow, that's where the access point would have to be.
That driveway cannot be moved further down Ziegler.
Not without a site plan amendment.
Correct.
Okay, because I think that's important simply because that means the trucks would only have to cross the road in that one place and not have to travel down.
Sure, and I'm sure utilities wants it that way
Right.
for ease of access.
Right, I just want to make sure that that was included. And then I had a question about the erosion control and stormwater aspects of this.
Okay.
I noticed that there are 3 sediment ponds on the site plan. Are those fixed in stone? In other words, will they be there, or are those just conceptual if needed under some stormwater plan?
I may defer to Keith Huff on that question to have him come up and provide some insight on that.
And they do not have to provide a study unless they have more than 10,000 square feet of impervious cover. And there's a possibility, just with that little driveway linkage, that they won't even have to provide a study. That's a possibility.
That was part of my question, what counts as impervious cover? So it would just be the driveway and
It would be
not...
the driveway, right.
Okay.
And so at that time, the final location of those ponds will be determined if they have to do a study. They may not need but 2 of the ponds instead of 3.
Okay. And I did have a question, Keith, for you about the erosion control aspect of it. When you are taking dirt and putting it in a pile, do you need to do some type of erosion control for the dirt that you're piling up?
Yeah, I imagine, and Ed and his folks and Jan could speak more to this, but they have perimeter measures, the ponds, and I can speak from their other activities that we've monitored. They have perimeter measures to guide those erosion control items or deal with the erosion from the site and mitigate that. So,
And that will be permanent? It's not like a temporary thing?
I would defer to them on what their specific measures are. We haven't reviewed any kind of stormwater management plans for this site because The landfill itself is under its own NPDES permit and has its own criteria. And so we haven't reviewed any specific stormwater management plans for it that may or may not include temporary or permanent erosion control measures. I'm speaking typically what they would include. So they could probably answer any specific question.
Yeah, I would like to know if those would be required.
Can we have our consulting engineer address that?
Hi, Mike Plummer, 7709 Rathman Court, Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm with HDR. To answer your question, those are, we've just shown those as potentials. We have not done the complete design. We would be required to permit it through the State Land Quality Department, so we would have to do the full-blown calculations, determine the drainage areas, size the basins appropriately for that. Once we're done with the site, we would have the ability to decommission those basins, but the state would be involved in coming in and assessing it and making sure that they're okay with us decommissioning the basins.
Okay, so, but there are controls that would protect the streams in that area from sedimentation coming in. That was my main concern.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Any other questions? I need to correct that Mr. Leak, second I said Mr. Little, he said Mr. Little's seat, and habit's hard to break, but anyway, Mr. Leak. Okay, we have a motion for approval, all in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous.
All right, next item is item B3, zoning docket W 3353, and this is a request to rezone about half an acre from neighborhood business limited use zoning to the same district. And the change here is they are asking to add the use of restaurant without drive-through service to their existing list of uses. So you can see the site there. It's on the north side of Hawthorne Road, west of Bolton Street. You can see kind of a mix of zoning in the area, some limited office zoning to the north and to the west. And to the south and to the east, you've got some RS9 zoning. That parcel directly to the east of the site is an existing church. So again, this is to add the use restaurant without drive-through service to their existing list of uses, which includes things like retail store, offices, services A, things of that nature. Our staff's reviewed this. We feel it's consistent with the area plan recommendations, and we would recommend approval of this NBL request.
No one has signed up. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval.
Second. Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Younger. Any discussion?
Sorry, yeah. Mr. King, what impact does this have on parking between the church and retail?
So when they're currently non-conforming to parking because of our rules that we have in GMA2. They're allowed to change uses in and out without meeting current parking requirements. When you add the use of restaurant to a site, that triggers the impact of having to meet parking requirements. So whenever they come in to get permits for the restaurant use, they're going to have to demonstrate they have enough parking on this NBL lot to meet all of the tenants in that building's parking requirements.
And so what you're telling me is that that parking would be on the church's current parking?
Current church parking lot is zoned NBL today.
And how do you work out that in terms of approval? Is somebody else able to use the same parking spaces as the church?
Yeah, there's a provision in our ordinance that allows, especially in cases where there's uses that have different peak hours. So obviously churches have their Sunday mornings, Wednesday evening time periods, and restaurants are different. So there's a provision in the ordinance that allows us to allow that parking to kind of double count for both of those uses.
And that will be a staff decision?
It will be. It has to get approval from the Public Works Director.
Okay, because that's the only comment I've heard from the neighborhood is being concerned about how's that all going to work out.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I had a question about, in the staff report, you mentioned that there was a condition on Services A that was attached to the original rezoning and that you were continuing that with this rezoning.
Correct.
But you didn't mention what condition that was.
Yeah, so it says the use of Services A shall not include the following sub-uses, and it lists garment pressing and agents for laundries and dry cleaners, coin-operated laundries and dry cleaning plants except rug, carpet, and upholstery cleaning. So apparently those uses were objectionable when this was originally rezoned to NBL, and so they were conditioned to not be allowed on the site that same condition would carry forward with this rezoning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Have a motion for approval. Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B4, zoning docket F1571, and this is a request to rezone about 5 acres from AG to general business, special use 2-phase. And this is for a site you can see there in the yellow on the east side of Union Cross Road across from Glenn High School. The applicant has requested this item be continued for 1 month. They got their request in by the automatic deadline. So this item is automatically continued to your December meeting, and no vote is needed on this item. Next item is C1. This is Subdivision 2017-089, and this is a request for a single-family subdivision in RS20 zoning. It's about 19 acres on the east side of Lassiter Road near Center Grove Church Road. You may be familiar with this site. We had this in for rezoning a few months ago to go from RS40 to RS20, and that was recently approved by the county commissioners. So now the applicant is in to request preliminary subdivision approval for a design under their new RS20 zoning. This is the site plan that's been submitted with this request. Again, it is a conventional subdivision, so we're not looking at things like open space and buffers. Rather, we're looking to make sure all the lots are 20,000 square feet in size and 95 feet in width, and they are. I believe it's 32 lots you see there. Public street would come in off Lassiter, going east-west, and then there will be a north-south connection to Kilrush, which is in the Waterford subdivision to the south. So that street would connect the two neighborhoods. Staff has reviewed this. It does meet the requirements of UDO, and we would recommend approval of this subdivision request.
Move approval.
Second. Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Younger. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is C2. It's Subdivision 2017-100, and this is about 13 acres on the west side of Harper Road. And again, it's for a single-family subdivision. The applicant has requested that this be continued 1 month to your December meeting. They got their request in by the automatic deadline, so this is automatically continued to December, and no vote is needed on this one either. Next item is D1, and this is PBR 2017-012. This is for a planned residential development in RS9 zoning. It's about 3.5 acres on the east side of Peacehaven Road. This is north of 421. You can see the site there in yellow. It contains 2 existing single-family homes that will be removed as part of the subdivision development. And you can see the zoning pattern in the area, kind of a mixture of RS9 and some multifamily, some assorted multifamily zonings. So I mentioned to you this is a planned residential development, so we do need to look at things like buffers and open space, and we'll kind of walk through those briefly. Anytime you're doing a PRD, you're required a 30-foot perimeter buffer yard, and that's what's shown in green. That's required along the northern property line and the eastern property line. It's not required along the southern property line because the site abuts multifamily zoning in that location. In terms of, in terms of open space, this does require thoroughfare open space because it is located along a major or minor thoroughfare in Peacehaven Road, and that's what you see in the blue area right here. The ordinance requires a 50-foot wide thoroughfare open space area to be dedicated with Type 3 plantings located in the area. It also allows a developer to come back in and ask for alternative compliance if they can't meet that standard. The applicant is requesting alternative compliance. They are proposing 40-foot wide. They're putting in the Type 3 plantings that are required. So what happens in a 40-foot Type 3 buffer yard is you have to put in your primary evergreen or your deciduous trees and your primary evergreens. No shrubs are required. They're volunteering to go ahead and put those shrubs in to provide some additional screening there. So they would be putting in the full gamut, more plantings than they have to. And so staff is satisfied with that as an additional measure to trade off for those 10 feet. We think that's reasonable. In terms of the passive open space that's required, that's basically met through the combination of the thoroughfare open space and the perimeter buffer yards. And last is the active open space that's required, and you can see that shown in the 2 red circles. One is located right here along the entrance drive as you first come in, kind of a pocket park in that area. And then down to the south of the drive there's another small little pocket park area here. So this space alone right here to the north satisfies the active open space requirements. So basically what's shown to the south is just in addition to, so we commend the developer for providing something in addition to and doing a good job on that. So with that, staff would recommend approval of this PBR request.
Move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Second, Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion?
I wondered if Mr. Huff could talk a little bit about the stormwater planning here. I swear it's just so small I couldn't understand what was going on, and it seems different somehow. There's a blue line across Mr. Huff, and then another discharge going down into another blue area.
Yeah, I think what they're intending with the site plan depiction is a quality and quantity combination device. Due to the density and disturbed area, they're going to be subject to both the quality and quantity provisions of the Chapter 75 ordinance. So what they're doing is a staged device here for quality and quantity here is probably what you're seeing.
And there's a line down in my lower right that feeds off into what looks like maybe riprap or something like that.
Correct.
Now, where is that going? Is it a natural area, or is it somebody else's property, or what?
That's going into the backyard of a neighbor's property. It's a riprap energy dissipator. It's common with the outfall of these types of devices.
And do you have to get permission from your neighbor when you do that?
No. Typically, you release the water, and you're releasing it hopefully at a velocity that is not harmful for the downstream property owner.
I think last month you educated us about how often 50-year storms occur, and so there will be some initial quality. What standard is this built to?
Okay, so this facility here will comply with the 2, 10, and 25 peak and volume control requirements for quantity, and it will comply with our quality control provisions as well.
I wish that consoled me.
That is our typical standards for Chapter 75.
Yeah, sometime we've just got to look into how this affects other property owners when you can discharge this. I know that meets the zoning requirements, but it's just, to look at it and to know that somebody's being affected by it there that may not be a willing participant is it doesn't feel comfortable in terms of voting.
Well, and it's really not the zoning requirements per se. It's the adopted stormwater ordinance,
Right.
and it's because there have been so many questions in the last few months about the details of how does the stormwater ordinance work and the regulations and all that. I'm thinking it would be a good idea maybe in our January work session to have Keith come and actually do a kind of a update. You remember he was with us maybe about 4 years ago, went through that, and then probably given all these questions that are coming, probably be good for him to come and just give the planning board a good understanding of how the regulations that we have today work, how they interact or don't interact with the past regulations and things like that. So,
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We have a motion for approval. Those in favor? Any opposed?
I'm abstaining.
You're abstaining?
Abstaining. Yep.
Okay, next item, it's item D2. This is PBR 2013-06, and this is for a school stadium in IP, institutional public zoning. And you can see the subject property shown here in yellow. This is the Reynolds High School campus here, shown in yellow, that abuts Ronald Road. It's north of Northwest Boulevard. Then you can see Northwest Boulevard coming through the site. This is the surface lot that the school system owns, Wiley Middle School, and then the two gymnasiums located here on the eastern portion of the site. Haynes Park coming in over to the east and to the south of the subject property. Peters Creek running through here, and then east of Peters Creek is a historic overlay zoning for the West End neighborhood. I think everybody's fairly familiar with the site. Just wanted to start this with a little bit of background. In 2012, City Council adopted UDO 233. We had a lot of discussion at that time about school stadiums and parking. And the UDO 233, which is approved by City Council, put the standards in the ordinance that we use today. And it basically says parking for stadiums in growth management areas 1 and 2, which this site is in growth management area 2, It says a special use permit from the elected body in accordance with the UDO must be granted for new stadiums and stadium expansions with more than a total of 1,500 seats in GMAs 1 and 2, unless there's adequate off-street parking on the zoning lot of the proposed school stadium, and it establishes the rate of one space per four seats for the parking requirement. So to kind of walk through this, the subject request is for a 2,040-seat stadium. So if we take that parking ratio that was established through UDO 233 on the previous slide, we take the 2,040, we divide it by 4, we come out with a total of 510 spaces required on the zoning lot. So in this case, the zoning lot is everything in yellow because it's owned by the school system. It's in the same ownership, so that's their zoning lot. I also wanted to mention while we're on this slide that no parking reductions were taken when we calculated this. So the board knows that the UDO grants certain parking reductions for sidewalks, for transit. If your site abuts a sidewalk, you get a reduction. If you're in close proximity to transit, you get a reduction. If you double the number of bike racks, you get a reduction. All those things are allowed to bring your required parking number down. None of those were used in this calculation. It's just a standard calculation that you see there on that second bullet. I also wanted to mention that the parking calculations do not include the on-street parking that's currently available along Northwest Boulevard. We asked our city DOT staff to just go out and take a look at that, and their rough estimate was approximately 120 parallel spaces. So the UDO does not allow those spaces to be used in meeting your minimum parking requirements. However, they are out there and they can be used for a practical purpose. So there's 120 spaces out there that aren't included in that calculation. And last, I just want to make sure we're clear on one thing. The staff report does mention the maximum number of seats that could be accommodated is 2,240. So what the site plan was showing there is they have excess parking. With that excess parking, the total number of seats you could do would be 2,240. That's not what's requested. What is requested is 2,040. So I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Anything over 2,040, if this is approved, it would have to come back to the board and go through the same process. So 2,040 is kind of the magic number we're working with here. So this is the site plan that's been submitted with this request, and to kind of get you oriented, you can see Hawthorne Road's over on the left side of the image and Northwest Boulevard's located towards the top. The school surface lot located in this island here. Wiley Middle School, of course, being located here. The existing gymnasium, which would be in this area, would have to be removed for the stadium to be constructed. The existing surface lot along Northwest Boulevard, and then the two gymnasiums located on the eastern portion of the site. And we'll zoom in a little bit closer here. So again, as you come off Northwest Boulevard, you've kind of got the surface lot in that area, which would pretty much remain. You would come down, the home bleachers would be located in this area, approximately 1,500 seats, and the visitors' bleachers would be located on the south side of the site with approximately 500 seats, again adding up to 2,040. There would be a small building that would be constructed for restrooms, ticket sales, and concessions located on the eastern portion of the site directly behind the auxiliary gym in this location here. So to kind of walk through the parking requirements on this, again, as I told you, the requirement is one space required per 4 seats. And so again, we take that 2,040 divided by 4, that's 510 that's required. So our staff actually met with the school system staff and the Stimel folks to kind of go out on site and actually walk the site and make sure all the parking spaces line up and there's an accurate inventory. And so we spent about 2 hours walking the site and going through all these parking bays. So what you see in red are the number of parking spaces located within each of these bays. So you can kind of add those up. If you look at all these bays located on the north side here of Northwest Boulevard, it's roughly 401 spaces on the north side. In the surface lot located at the corner of Hawthorne and Northwest, you got 29 and 68. Around Wiley, you've got around 19. And then in the front surface lot, you've got 43 for a total of 560. And again, I'll mention it one more time, there are approximately 120 on-street spaces available along Northwest Boulevard that could be utilized. There are conditions attached to this request. I'll kind of go over them in general. There's a request that, or there's a condition that this request must go before the Community Appearance Commission for their review. A driveway permit must be obtained from the city. Stormwater would have to be complied with in terms of Chapter 75 of the City Code. And we do have a lighting condition that the applicants have agreed to, A lot of the language in that lighting condition was mirrored off what we did for the ballpark. That's the closest thing that we had to work with, and the standards in there come from that same condition. So just to remind the planning board and the folks in attendance and watching at home, the UDO directs, this is a planning board review item. So the UDO establishes these rules for planning board review items. It says the planning board shall approve any request for permits which meet all the requirements of this ordinance and deny any requests that do not meet the requirements of this ordinance. And it does allow for the planning board to attach conditions to a request, and it gives a list of, and again, these are generalized, it gives a list of items for which those conditions could be tied to: right-of-way dedication, greenway easements, stormwater management, etc. So I just wanted to close with a couple of issues. I know there's been a lot of interest in this case from the public. Just to clarify, this is not a rezoning. It is basically a compliance check with the UDO standards to make sure that all of those have been met. Another point is that I know in a lot of the emails that have come into our staff, there's been a lot of concern and question about future phases and things that have been disseminated among the public about additional seats. We have to evaluate this request on what's presented at this time to make sure that what's presented meets the requirements at this time. If there, or in the future, if there are intentions to go ahead and increase the seating capacity of the stadium, they would have to come back through the same process we're going through now, and they would have to demonstrate they've got the commensurate parking to go along with the seating they're proposing. And last, just to clarify before anything else is said, this is for 2,040 seats maximum. And with that, staff would recommend approval of this PBR request.
Move approval. Second.
Got a motion, Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion?
Yeah. So, Mr. King, let's. I don't know if you're the appropriate person. It may be the school system here. I'm trying to figure out the whole parking issue. So I'm trying to figure out how many games are going to be played there. What time are those games? And what hours?
I would definitely defer to the school system on their operation of that.
Oh, okay.
Of the stadium.
Mr. Walker? Is that?
Thank you. Typically, you're going to have, you're going to have multiple.
Mr. Walker, give us your name and address, please.
All right, thank you. Darrell Walker, 475 Corporate Square Drive, Winston-Salem. Typically, in the fall, you're going to have multiple sports. You're going to have football, you're going to have boys soccer, and you're going to have field hockey. All right, yeah. In the spring, you're going to have girls soccer, lacrosse, and let's say girls soccer, lacrosse. Boys and girls. Yeah, boys and girls lacrosse. So you would typically have, obviously in football, you're going to have probably 5 home games a year. You know, you're probably going to be in the range of soccer is going to be somewhere around probably 10 home games a year. Most of those games, let me back up. So football is going to start about 7 o'clock, should wrap up about 9:30, 9:45. It's typical timeline on football. Soccer typically will start either at 5 or some of them start at 7, and those are 80-minute games. If they go into overtime, they could go into 2 10-minute halves and an additional 5-minute half. So you could have 110 minutes. The length of the game for the most part, or typically should be over, I would think, around 7:30, 8 o'clock, except football.
Now, living on the park, I get to see a lot of it. Will the practices for football and these different sports occur on the field, because that attracts people as well?
Well, I'm not sure that decision's been made. I think depending on the surface, if it's artificial surface, obviously you could practice more and play on it. If
So
it's
we don't know what surface it is at this point?
Well, it hasn't been fully designed at this point. So what we're looking at is a site plan approval, not necessarily full design yet. So
Well, that's still, okay.
yeah, so it could.
Yeah.
It could be a practice location as well as a game location. That would not be typical for a lot of our other schools. Don't necessarily all practice on their home stadiums, but sometimes soccer and lacrosse and some of those have to because of the lack of field space.
Mr. Walker, where does Reynolds practice football now?
They are on the baseball field and the outfield out
Haynes
in
Park?
the park.
Okay, and how many basketball games a year are there?
Basketball, you're going to have probably around 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Men's and women's,
Men's and, well,
plus JV?
going to probably be 35 or 40, men's and women's and
What
JV.
time do those usually run?
Those typically start around 5 o'clock and end up about 8:30 or 9 o'clock.
And they're doing those on campus now?
That is correct.
Will any of those be occurring at the same time of any other of these sports?
Typically, winter sports, fall sports end up 1st of December. Basketball is going to start here around Thanksgiving, end up in February. Spring sports, which includes those girls soccer, field hockey, girls soccer and lacrosse are going to, their official first practice date is around February 15th.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues that is in the UDO is noise. At what will be the latest time that any activity will be occurring on this field?
In my opinion, based upon our current schedules, probably 9:45. I don't see anything going past that.
Is there any policy to back that up or anything like that that can reassure?
So if you're playing a
folks that
football
live-
game Friday night and a thunderstorm hits,
Mhm.
we have to delay the game for 30 minutes or an hour. Is it possible to push back into 10:15? Absolutely. Weather conditions could drive that.
Is there a way the school could put a condition on how late that noise would occur?
No, not. I don't think we could based upon. That's a high school, North Carolina High School Athletic Association question as well. But I don't think we would put a stipulation. We could put some stipulation in that we will work hard to get to that. But I don't think that we can put a stipulation that we could guarantee that if you had weather delays that you wouldn't push up. But I've, knock on wood, be honest with you, in my 10 years here, we've never had to go past that.
So you couldn't guarantee the area that there wouldn't be noise after 11 at night?
I couldn't control that because of weather. Other than weather, there's no reason why it should be.
There are no other activities that can occur on that field other than these sports activities?
There shouldn't be.
So there wouldn't be any concerts, any, I'm hoping the band doesn't want to play after 10 o'clock at night, but I know they practice down there a lot.
I think, if we were to lease the space for whatever reason.
Oh, you can lease it?
Obviously, you could, but we can lease any school property, piece of
Okay.
property. And if we did that, we could put that stipulation in our agreement.
Would you state that now that
I'd be
you would?
happy to do that.
Okay.
We've not had an issue with that in any of our other leases. So I don't think
Okay.
we'd have a problem with that.
Okay, you may have something else from Mr. I have other questions, but not Mr. Palmer.
I do have some questions about, could you tell me, just so that I understand comparison-wise, like, for example, a school like Reagan High School or Mount Tabor, how many seats do they have in their stadiums?
So Reagan and Tabor, Tabor just dropped down to 3A, but before that they were 4A. So Reagan and Mount Tabor have around 4,500 seats in their stadium because they're a 4A size school at the time.
And do they have a comparable student body to R.J. Reynolds High School?
Demographically?
No, in terms of numbers.
Within probably 150 students.
Okay. So those,
Tabor would be a little bit smaller. Reagan and Reynolds would be comparable.
okay. Here's my concern, and what I'm worried about is those schools, comparable sized schools, have a demand that they use a 4,000 seat stadium. I'm just wondering what kinds of controls you have to make sure that, say, a stadium that has 2,040 seats, when you have a game, how do you know that only that many people are coming? I mean, is there, you count people at the door and then shut it off after a certain amount of time? Or
We're still under the guidance of the fire marshal. So
there is a way to control.
So we would have to count in that and just, we know there may be big games, and let's just say let's just say they're both 10-0. Let's take the Glen and West game last week. We had 6,000 people there. In this scenario, if it was Reynolds, it's possible, if they wanted to, that you'd have to move the game.
But as people come into the stadium, there's a way to take a count. You're not letting in more people than you have seats for.
We wouldn't be allowed to by the fire marshal ordinance either.
And you have procedures in place to make sure that they don't.
We have crowd management issues with all of our athletic events.
Okay. Because, if you only have that many parking places, you can't have more people filling those seats than you have parking places for.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the other question is about managing the parking, because, it's a large campus and some of the spaces are quite far away from the stadium. Do you have a plan in place to manage the parking so that you're directing people towards those spaces?
I'll tell you what we typically do in a lot of our schools is we use our JROTC program. So we have students who help manage that. We don't typically hire off-duty. We do have off-duty officers working security at the stadium, but we don't necessarily employ them to direct traffic or park cars. So we have a lot of student activity around that with JROTC for the most part.
Mr. Walker, while we're talking about the parking, unless you're finished,
No.
let me ask a couple other. Maybe you are the right person on some of this. I was going to ask Mr. King, but beside the home bleachers seem to be some hillsides. Are these going to be ever used for people sitting on it, which would then increase the number of people in there, in the stadium?
Oh, you talking about letting people in sitting on the hillside,
right?
Grassed area. If the requirement is 2,040 and under the ordinance of the fire marshal, we're going to be limited to that unless we get some kind of special.
Wait a minute. Does the fire marshal follow the parking regulations and like that? Or is that a different regulation?
They do have some input as it relates to the safety inside of a stadium and what your capacity is.
But has that been determined at this point?
2,040, right?
Well, that's what the parking is related to, but because it's outside and other things like that, fire marshals could say you could have 6,000 in there.
That's not possible.
Why is that?
First of all, wouldn't be a safe environment for us, and we're not going to allow past the capacity in the building without some kind of special permit to do that.
When you're looking at the number of people that are in the stadium, are you counting the athletes?
No, sir.
Are you counting the bands?
If they're in the bleachers, they're part of the capacity.
So they would be part of the capacity sitting in the bleachers, and that's where they would sit.
Typically, they do.
Typically. Well, okay. There's not going to be other accommodations. And are you counting the buses? Are the buses going to park across Hawthorne in those larger spaces? Is that what you were anticipating?
My guess they would probably park either that or they could park down around the Bryson Gym somewhere or across Northwest.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Aren't there some larger spaces across Northwest where some of the middle school buses park or
yes, sir.
Whatever in there? How do you think we can keep attendees from parking in the neighborhood? And I'll tell you why I'm going this way. We got a lot of response from folks that wrote in today. And in my compilation of that, what I saw was that, well, I thought I had it right here. What I saw in that were about 60, there were about 50 responses. There were 6 pro, and then there were a bunch of other responses. There were letters that had nothing to do with the UDO. There were a few of those, but I was amazed at how few there were in that. And let's see if I can thumb over to it real quick where I put that. They were 6-4 and 20 against. In terms of the issues which are germane to this hearing here, there were 10 that had to do with noise, 5 with lighting, 15 with parking, 5 with stormwater and impervious surface, 6 with the plans not being complete in front of us, and then there were 2 others on litter, which has been a sort of persistent problem, but not part of this UDO. So parking seems to be the biggest issue. So how do we look at this development and reassure the neighbors that are in West Salem there and Buena Vista and West End that these folks aren't going to be parking in the Haynes Park where other people want to use Haynes Park, or in the front of their houses where they're trying to, don't have off-street parking and things like that?
Well, I think in this situation, signage is going to be important to direct people to the right locations of parking. It may force us at some point to hire some folks to direct traffic, even though we don't typically do that. But I think, it's all about habits at some point, and part of this is getting off on the right foot and communicating well. But I do think we're going to have some significant signage and thing to move people to the right direction. We don't necessarily do that when there's basketball games, and the capacity of Bryson Gym's about 2,390 in there. So the gym's actually going to be a larger capacity than the stadium. And I'm not sure, and I've had a lot of conversation with the neighborhood folks, but haven't really dug into if there's been a problem on basketball nights with people parking up in the neighborhoods. But
I think down at Haynes Park and on the grass, I think, has been the big issue that perks up all the time.
We'll have to be directive about it. There's no doubt about that when that point comes.
Well, would you consider adding that as a condition that for that first year you would direct parking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
When you say direct parking, he mentioned
to the correct areas.
No, but you thinking junior ROTC, or are you thinking?
I don't care really
Okay,
who
so
does it personally. I just want the people that come there to know where they should park rather than where they should not.
I'm fine with that if it's junior ROTC. I don't want to put additional stipulations on one school that we don't have in another school.
Just a point of clarification, though, the parking that we're talking about, the on-street parking, is public parking, correct?
Right. That's correct.
Yes. So anybody can park there. If I'm going to Haynes Park, if I'm walking to West End, if I'm going to park there and walk downtown, I can park there because it's public parking, correct?
That's correct.
There is a parking permit program that a neighborhood can request that be established for their neighborhood, and then everyone would get a sticker there, and then the police would be empowered to enforce that if there's folks without a sticker parking in the neighborhood. So that certainly is an option for the neighborhood. Let me just add one more thing, is I just want to give a little caution that if we get really detailed into operational things that are conditioned on there, that makes it a very difficult thing to enforce, for enforcement purposes. Like, we're not going to have zoning enforcement officers that are standing around at game times kind of enforcing parking regulations or the hours or things like that. We have to operate based on complaints. So I just want to be caution a little bit about how detailed we get in terms of conditions. If they want to state on the public record that they're willing to agree to it, that's one thing. If we start getting into formal conditions that put then burdens on enforcement staff to kind of do that, then that gets to be a little concern too.
Well, based on the response, I don't think you're going to have any problem from the neighbors, doing it versus by complaints if there is something that goes on.
Right.
I was unable to read your site plan or STEML site plan in terms of the handicap spaces and the number of handicaps that are required for this number of spaces. What's the requirement for number of handicaps for 2,040 spaces?
Wouldn't that already be in place for the basketball, though?
I have no idea. Okay. We're looking at this particular issue.
Currently, yes, we meet the code for that, but I don't know if it's any different with that. That's refer to Luke or Doug on that.
Or do you meet code, or did you grandfather under code? Because that Bryson's been there a long time.
Yeah, it is. You're right. 1920-some building, so.
Yes.
Luke Dickey, Stimmel Associates, 601 North Trade Street, Suite 200, Winston-Salem 27101. We will have to meet ordinance requirements and building code requirements for handicap parking spaces. The final engineered plans have now, of course, been reviewed by building at this time, because this is just a site plan review. We are showing at that lot that's up at the front, 14 plus spaces for a handicap. If there needs to be more, we can accommodate additional handicap parking spaces in that lot. Where we had 43 total spaces, it'll just be worked out at that time about to meet the parking requirements for handicap accessibility. So it's an ADA code. Yes, we'll have to meet that.
And you're assuming that your other excess capacity is going to be more than enough to cover the wider spaces with handicap?
Yes. Yeah. So if we've got once again, we're asking for 2,040 seats. We have enough parking on site to accommodate 2,240 seats. So if some of those parking spaces have to be reduced to provide for handicap parking at that main entrance, then that was what will be done. It was intended that since we got people walking from a distance of those lots in Reynolds campus, that all the handicap parking be right there at the very front of the stadium, and that's what we would designate handicap parking spaces in those locations.
While I've got you up here, Mr. Dickey, I couldn't read on the plan how long these bleachers were, and the parking is related to one seat, one parking per 4 seats, and I did look at the parking and what was available there, but I didn't see what the length of the bleachers was to calculate the 18 inches per seat.
Yeah, so basically on the visitor side, you have 5 rows of seating with aisles. On the home side, we had roughly showing 16 rows of bleachers, and then it was just a quantity takeoff of all that linear footage divided by the 18 inches per seat, and that's where we came up with a count of how many seats would be on it. So I can't give you the exact, I don't have the exact measurement of how
Have
wide
you
those
calculated the measurements for the bleachers?
Yes, based on the drawing that we have in front of you, we calculated the length of what the bleachers would be.
And do you know what that says?
I do not have the exact. It came out to the 2,040 seats.
That really left us at a disadvantage in looking at these plans, because your assumption was that it was number of seats, and I mean, how do you know the number of seats?
We are limiting ourselves to 2,040 seats for your plan review today.
Okay, so that's, do you know then what the length of a bleacher would be?
In terms of the overall length of the bleachers that we're showing on our site plans, if I had a scale, I could give you the exact measurement of that.
Okay, so that isn't quite done yet.
No, it's done. It's just that it's the fact that these plans will be reviewed once the final engineered plans from an architecture standpoint of the bleachers, but we have enough spaces on site. We're basing our seating calculations on, and we're not exceeding that amount.
And you could double the amount of bleacher space that you have, and you're still only going to get 2,040 people through that turnstile.
Right.
Right. Okay.
That's a hope. Yep. Let me move on to another area that's within the UDO, which is well, from what I'm hearing with Mr. Walker, we don't know whether this is a turf or natural. So how are you planning any handling of runoff water? I saw something on the plan that indicated that there was a stormwater plan.
Yes, there will be stormwater devices will be required per the current ordinance requirements of the stormwater for Chapter 75, and we will meet those requirements.
Do the schools get any kind of special treatment on meeting the current stormwater requirements or anything like that?
No,
they got to comply with the same rules that everybody else has got to comply with.
That's correct.
Okay.
And nonprofits pay stormwater tax too. That's the one tax they do pay. They do, and it's it's crazy. I don't know if the school system does it, Mr. Walker? They pay a stormwater tax.
About $350,000 a year.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So, I mean, in order for the community to understand this, I mean, that was one of the issues that came through in the letters. How are you planning to get this water out of that area?
Well, right now what we're showing conceptually on our site plan is a underground stormwater management system that would be underneath the field. There's a 24-inch drain line that is currently running underneath that field, and it discharges directly into Peters Creek. The intent would be to take that system and the discharge point would tie directly into that 24-inch pipe, which goes underneath Haynes Park and discharges directly into Peters Creek.
Have you done any checking on the integrity of that pipe?
That has not been done at this point because this is just a site plan review and we haven't done the final engineering.
Okay. And has your firm any experience working with turf?
Talking about natural turf or the artificial turf?
Artificial turf.
What we do from our firm's experience is we would do a graded pad for what would be, and then a specialty field would come in and they would do the design of the field, who specializes in field design.
How do they keep the turf I'm familiar with, and I don't know what turf you're considering using, has asphalt or rubber particles in between the leaves of grass. And you see that on football games when it gets kicked up when somebody's sliding or something like that. How do you keep those from being discharged into Peters Creek?
Those items would obviously be the drainage way around it and have to go through the system, that stormwater management system, for any under drains and stuff like that in that field.
Do you see any disturbance of the rest of Haynes Park in putting this in? Because it is going to have to get to the stream somewhere.
Explain disturbance in terms of
any movement of dirt, any trucks, any whatever on Haynes Park. I mean, we're putting $2 million into Haynes Park right now, trying to improve it.
We have to comply with the erosion control and then the ordinances that are in place for stormwater on the site, for sedimentation and everything else.
Well, you see that last case that you probably overheard here, and I know you've been involved in some of this. My level of comfort isn't raised by seeing water that is overflowing from a stormwater thing going into riprap and then running over a property. You know what I mean? So I know what sort of lenience is unfortunately in that stormwater control right now, and that's why I'm trying to get some grip on this. What are we looking at? We have fought time and time again to improve Peters Creek. From the place that the police now occupy, from Haynes factory up there, trying to make it safe for children that play in that park. So how do we as a community know if you don't have anything designed at this point?
That design goes through the final development plans and permitting approvals.
And I'm really uncomfortable doing stormwater design at this layer right here. I understand the concerns.
I know.
I absolutely do. What we need to do probably is we need to revisit our stormwater controls and make sure that we understand, how they came to be developed, and if we've already strengthened them quite substantially, and if we need to strengthen them some more, something like that. But I'm very uncomfortable with us deciding whether we need a 24-inch pipe or 36-inch pipe or some kind of. I'm just not comfortable with that. And I think we do have to rely on the experts that we have in the on staff here. And they may be applying rules that are not tough enough. That's certainly possible.
I know.
That's certainly possible.
But there are times when things will not fit simply because
I agree.
You can't engineer them.
I agree.
And it doesn't make sense in terms of that. Is the school system, will the school system be required to pay the bond on upkeep of this stormwater?
Yeah, at that point, it becomes the ownership of the district. So, yeah, I would assume we would have to take that on.
And so you all are willing to take that bond on
we would
and
back
into the future?
Right.
Okay. When you were looking at the impervious surface, I didn't notice on the plan anything that showed the practice field on Reynolds, on Ronald Road. Is the driveway over there in that area not, is it all pervious?
To answer your question in regards to the impervious calculations, that did not look at the totality of the Reynolds campus. It was just looking at the impervious calculations on Wiley's campus.
And it was 30%?
That's correct, yes.
For Wiley's campus?
Correct.
Did you show the area that you were looking at on your plan?
Yes, the area.
For the impervious?
Yes, on that site plan with the impervious area. Yes, sir. So that included all the existing buildings, the sidewalks, and the new fields and everything.
That would be this area?
That's correct.
Which area?
The
area including all the gyms.
Of your site plan.
Oh, so everything.
The Wiley campus.
Okay, on that side of Hawthorne over there.
Yeah, that's correct.
And that's 30% that's covered.
That would be this campus right here, shown on your screen.
For some reason, that just looks bigger than 30% to me. I don't know, just eyeballing it. But I'm wrong, huh?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The staff check, I mean, you guys have looked to see.
When we receive a plan and it's sealed by a professional engineer, we take their word for it.
Right. Okay. All right.
So there is a lighting plan for this? I know we're in the midst of trying to come up with a stadium lighting plan, how imminent is this, Mr. Walker? Yeah, I mean, is there a possibility you could wait until we figure out what we need with stadium lights as an ordinance before you handle this case?
When you say handle this case,
before we have to move on it today, that we could continue it until we figure out the stadium lighting issue?
we would prefer to approve the site plan so that they could at least have the opportunity to start a design process.
Right.
Whatever the requirements are on the lighting, it's the last one we did was Walkertown High School. There was a lot of discussion about light pollution, things of that nature. We knock on wood, unfortunately, have not had any issues around that, and typically have had good success. If you want to see that as well in new school, Davie High Schools has a really neat lighting package up there that they've done in their stadium. So we would prefer to, and I'm representing the school district here, and so this is a private funded. So I'm trying to represent both parties here in the community as the school district as well as the school folks. But I think it would be unfair not to move forward on a site plan decision to give them an opportunity to get it designed to answer a lot of these questions you have around engineering and design work.
Mr. Walker,
because a lot of that's not going to be answered until that happens.
you have other high schools in the district that have stadiums that are in residential areas, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Almost all of them.
And Daryl, if you can answer this, I believe, is this the only stadium that we've agreed to a lighting condition?
That is correct.
Yes.
And is there a noise condition at all?
We do not have any noise condition around any of our stadiums at this point.
Yeah. You see, this stadium for you folks, and I had 3 kids and 2 foreign exchange students that went to Reynolds. So I'm very involved with this, and all of them were in athletics. 2 of them lettered. I'm a Reynolds alumni. I've given to past efforts, but this particular location is at the bottom of a bowl, which goes up on all sides into West End. So when we're looking at it, it is very germane in terms of what you do with lighting and what you do with noise. And we had to go through the same things with the baseball area. And it still has some effect on folks. And you watch it when fireworks go off at night. People complain and things like that. So I really find myself stuck here without hearing these final things come before us of how to say, okay, then this will work. This will fit within the UDO if I'm not hearing any final plan on stormwater, on noise, on some of these regulations around parking and how the discharge of water is going to be. So I'm stuck, folks.
Yeah, I had another question, I think for Mr. Huff, if he could come up. And again, this relates to stormwater again, and I take your point, Clarence, that we don't want to try to do the stormwater engineering, but for this case, my concern really is a stormwater control from this site feasible, and would it not adversely impact the recreational facilities of Haynes Park? What I'm really concerned about is the playing fields that are down below this site. Will they be flooded on a regular basis as a result of that? Can we control the stormwater in a way so that we don't have that outcome?
Yeah, great question, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's what they need to do the design for. There's a term called coinciding peaks, where If we're detaining water at this site when Peters Creek crest, we could be doing more harm than good by detaining the water, and that's why they need to study that as a part of their formal submittal under Chapter 75, because they are 180 feet approximately from the top of bank of Peters Creek, and if they can get that water out and away from the site before Peters Creek itself crests, then they might want to I encourage them to investigate that because it's for the betterment of the park and the downstream property owners.
Well, here's my question. When they come to you with a stormwater plan to approve, will the standards that you use in evaluating their plan take into account the impacts on Haynes Park? And if there are adverse impacts, would you deny that stormwater, or can they be approved at a level that still causes harm?
We approve prescriptive to Chapter 75 of the city code. The city code allows for a no adverse impact downstream study, and that is specifically to forego the water quantity control requirements. If they can show that via sealed engineering study that the site yields no adverse impacts, then quantity control can be waived. In this case, because of the density of the site, they have to manage for quality. That's a given. But they will have to investigate the situation and those coinciding peaks to see if the quantity control is needed or it's in the best interest of the community to waive quantity control, because we don't want the water from this site being released when Peters Creek is cresting, if that makes sense.
But you won't know that until after you get their engineered plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Because what I was really getting to is, did you think that there was some condition that we could put on in advance related to the outcome that we want to see, or do you have to wait until you get the engineered study?
Yeah, we would need to see the study because that is their option to do so. We can't compel them to do the no adverse impact study. They can just do quality and quantity and move forward per the ordinance provisions. But if they choose to do so, they can forego the cost of the quantity control system and just do quality if they can prove that no adverse impact exists.
Okay. So you wouldn't recommend that there is anything that we could ask them to do at this point?
Not without ciphering through the language, and nothing comes to mind to answer your question right now that puts your concerns to rest, put it that way.
Any more comments, just questions, anyone? We do have a motion for approval on this, I believe.
Yes.
Second.
I believe Mr. Wills already seconded. Any opposed discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? 2 opposed, okay? No opposed. Thank you.
Let's see, that gets us to agenda item 5, the public hearing on UDO 281, and Tiffany White will do the staff presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about UDO 281, which is a request to amend the Unified Development Ordinance to further restrict limited campus uses in residential zoning. This was put forth by Planning and Development Services staff. Whoops. So some background, limited campus use provisions allow campus-owned institutions to establish multifamily or office uses within 500 feet of the campus-owned property. There are use provisions that have been in the UDO since its adoption to allow institutions to expand while also protecting the neighborhood character. Prior to the UDO adoption, most institutions could locate anywhere in residential neighborhoods without any restrictions. So use conditions for limited campus uses currently require scale and massing consistent with the neighborhood, parking behind the buildings, being located on a major or minor thoroughfare, and type 1 buffer yards to reduce the impact of those uses on surrounding neighborhoods. Currently, limited campus use provisions or proposals are reviewed by the planning board without a public hearing. After a May 2017 zoning case involving Baptist Medical Center, City Council asked staff to prepare a UDO amendment that would further restrict limited campus uses in residential areas. On June 19th, staff began soliciting comments about the proposed change to the UDO from stakeholders, including all the C-zoned institutions and various neighborhood associations, including the Neighborhood Alliance. We also held a stakeholder meeting on August 22nd to discuss the proposed amendment. As a result of these meetings, Wake Forest University has proposed alternate language for UDO 281, which was sent to the community stakeholders on October 4th. This is a map of the current C-zoned properties along with CL and CS zoned properties. And I can tell you what each of those are if you're unfamiliar. Oops, this is Wake Forest, Children's Home, Winston-Salem State, Salem, School of the Arts, Forsyth Tech, Forsyth Hospital, Baptist Hospital, and out here is Center Grove Church. So the initial staff proposal for the UDO change would require future limited campus use proposals in residential areas to be reviewed under the City Council County Commissioners special use permit process. This process requires a public hearing under quasi-judicial procedures where affected citizens can be allowed to comment. Staff believes this proposal would allow the institutions to continue to grow using the limited campus use provisions while allowing adjacent neighborhood residents to have a greater role in the development review process. As I mentioned earlier, Wake Forest came in with an alternate proposal. This proposal retains existing planning board review authority, but it proposes that limited campus uses not be allowed adjacent to campus districts with limited or special use zoning, so the CS or CL zoning. For general campus zone properties, limited campus uses will be further restricted to properties adjacent to the campus zone property as defined by sharing a property line or immediately across the street from the campus zone parcel. And finally, it maintains the current condition that the limited campus use structure must be within 500 feet of the campus zoning, even if it's on an adjacent parcel. In addition, late last night, we received an email from the Neighborhood Alliance with an additional proposal that these two proposals be combined. We placed the letter at your places for you to review. Staff recommends approval of either the staff proposed version or the Wake Forest proposed version, since both allow for further restrictions per the City Council request.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? This is the public hearing. Mr. Morgan, would you like to speak?
Thank you. I'm Reed Morgan. My business address is 1834 Wake Forest Road, Winston-Salem, 27109. On behalf of Wake Forest, I want to express gratitude for the time and attention the matter has received from the Planning Board and from the staff. We appreciate the efforts of the community representatives. We have listened to what they've said, and we certainly want to be reasonable in our approaches to this and what we are recommending. As you know, the limited campus use concept came out of the UDO drafting process when the campus zone was originally created about 20 years ago. It was an important compromise because the zoning ordinance before the UDO permitted colleges and universities to operate fully in residential zones, with conditions, I should say. The limited campus use was adopted as a way of recognizing that certain low-intensity activities that were part of college life were appropriate in nearby residential areas if those activities were conducted in existing buildings or buildings of residential scale. Requirements for parking and other matters were set forth. Approval of the site plan was required by the Planning Board to assure that all the conditions were met. The limited campus use, as you have heard or may know, has not been much used. One reason for that is that some uses that would have qualified for limited campus use were done before the UDO was adopted, and thus there was no need to transfer to the new classification. The limited campus use has really caused no trouble. Instead, the issue which brings us together tonight this afternoon and this evening about this arose from the possibility of expanding the area for which limited campus use would be available as a consequence of rezoning. We believe we have taken care of this problem by proposing to allow limited campus uses only in the general use campus zones, not in campus limited or special zones, which the recent case which brings all this up was seeking. Since the great majority of rezoning cases receive the limited or special use classification, this means that the limited campus use would be available adjacent to what could be called the traditional boundaries of a campus, which would be zoned general. At Wake Forest, we have had some rezoning of bordering property under the UDO, but the campus zone has not been expanded beyond the recognized borders of Ronald and Polo and University Parkway. So it seems that the expansion of the limited campus radius, which was the concern that really got us here, can be managed through the type of rezoning which would be granted by the City Council or the County Commissioners. We have also listened to the neighborhood comments concerning the issues of adjacency, and our proposal limits the availability of limited campus use only to property actually adjoining campus property or directly across the street. Thus, we believe that the original logic which permitted limited campus uses is still appropriate for lower intensity uses in residential areas that are adjacent to the traditional, well-known boundaries of organizations operating in the campus zone. As such, we believe it is still appropriate for the Planning Board to confirm that those conditions have been met. I would note that Forsyth Tech and Winston-Salem State support this proposal and that neither Salem College nor the School of the Arts oppose it. Normally, I would guess it's true that a provision of the UDO is not reconsidered unless there's a problem with it. The limited campus use itself has caused no problem, but the expansion of its availability has raised questions. We believe that we have a solution that adequately addresses that issue, and as such, further changes in the manner of approval are not necessary. Should the provision cause trouble in the future, the UDO can always be amended to address that. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any.
Can I ask Mr. Sure. Your former compatriot, Mr. Corporate, said that you might have been involved in writing that original.
I was, yeah.
Thank you. What was the circumstances around the Ronald McDonald house in relationship to this? You go back far enough for that.
I do, but I don't know the exact. I mean, I bet the planning staff knows that one better than I do.
Yeah, because to me that was the issue that really brought this up, and it was sort of festering there, and the Queen Street issue popped out down the road, sort of.
What is the issue with the Ronald McDonald house?
Well,
I'm not familiar with
it. My understanding was that this was used in order to acquire property and use of that. And that there were eventually some compromises made. I don't know if was that before 18? Yeah, it was more than 18 years ago, or 19.
Yeah, the Ronald McDonald house was there before I arrived on the scene, so I couldn't tell you about the details of how that worked. Now, there was one expansion since then, but I wasn't aware even then that expansion was an issue. It came through the planning board, and I don't recall there being a lot of controversy about that. They may have worked out the issues, quietly before they even brought it. But I can't speak to the history of the original.
And it had nothing to do with Ronald McDonald House. It was just, it all was around the expansion of Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center up Hawthorne Road. And what kind of uses were going to be there and what was looked, and eventually I think there were some wonderful compromises made on what the streetscape was going to look like. I mean, most people wouldn't even know it wasn't a residential area now, but I think that, to me, that is where this originally occurred.
Yeah, the only one of us here now who's been here longer than me would be Margaret, and I don't know what she recalls about that original one. But.
Well, thank you, though, Mr. Morgan.
I had a question.
Oh, you had for
Between Kirk and I, and really we didn't bring the case because we didn't know. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know that right now people consider Ronald McDonald a problem. But our memory together is that there was a text amendment to clarify that Ronald McDonald House was a limited campus use. It's a little bit of a hybrid use. It specifically serves the hospital, but it's not owned by the hospital. So we remember that it changed the definition, or at least clarified that it could be a limited campus use. Okay. And then there was a later text amendment that established the 500-foot limit, so that it couldn't go on forever. Right. Do you have anything to add?
And that text amendment was added within, I would say, 6 months or so after the initial text amendment that allowed Ronald McDonald, okay. And it was kind of initiated by folks in the neighborhood who had some concerns that, as Margaret said, that it could go on forever. So this was just put in as a backstop in the ordinance to help safeguard the limited campus zone from just going on ad infinitum.
Yeah, it was very controversial, though. Gotcha.
I did the research on those two cases involving Ronald McDonald House. The text amendment referred to the type of use of Ronald McDonald House, because prior to that, because Ronald McDonald House was for families and had that kind of medical edge to it, it wasn't one of the uses for family stays that was initially considered for the campus uses, which were much more thinking about students. And so it just allowed that additional type of family use. And then 3 months later, because of the questions raised about how far out they could go, 3 months later, the additional text amendment came in for the 500-foot boundary. So those were the two that kind of dealt most directly with the Ronald McDonald House property.
Okay. Mr. Morgan, I think Ms. Duncan has another question.
Sure. Hi, Mr. Morgan, and thanks for crafting this, because I think that you hit upon some of the problems that were inherent in the limited campus use proposal. I just wanted to ask what your objection is to the special use permit approval process. Is it the amount of time that would go into it, or the reason I'm asking is because although, I think it's reasonable to have some greater look at some of the issues that might be occurring in a residential setting with limited campus uses, and I see the proposal that the staff made for special use permit as a mechanism to work out some of those differences with neighbors in the special use permit approval process. I don't think it would change your right to have those uses. It would just give a certain amount of input in the process of working out some of the details. And Mr. Bryan mentioned, he gave as an example, the Ronald McDonald House and how the residential look of that was important to the people who lived in the neighborhood. Those are the kinds of issues that can be worked out in a special use permit process, and I see some value to that. And so I'm just wondering if you had some objections, what those were.
Well, it seems, I guess, to me that the conditions that have been set forth in terms of the massing, the parking, and the fact that the planning board does review the matter in general and it has some discretion around the site plan, which would have to be put together. It seems to me that's sufficient in terms of how the matter stands, and it has not caused any problems, and so I would just ask that be considered to be a reasonable use. If it were to be a problem in the future with respect to how it were used, I would, we'd certainly have to look at it.
I thought of something else. Was Deacon Boulevard acquired using that?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all.
That's just what kind of relationship to campus?
I believe it's I believe it's zoned the way it's been zoned the entire time.
So it continues to be zoned as
highway business.
I think it's a commercial zone.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Thank
This
you.
is a public hearing. Does anyone else like to speak in support of this? Anyone like to speak in opposition? I'll declare the public hearing closed.
Does staff has no preference on which version?
We responded to a request that was basically in reaction to neighborhood concerns about the Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center's rezoning recently, to find a way to restrict the limited campus use from further expanding. So we kind of responded to that by just putting together all limited campus use would be required to special use permit. I think as the Wake Forest proposal came through, because it was targeted to deal with the issues involved in those expansive rezonings, I think that, it ultimately is going to be up to the city council to decide how far to go to kind of give that comfort. But given what I understood at the time, I think the Wake Forest one is responsive to that. Now, if the council wants to go further in having that scrutiny over the things beyond the existing general campus zone, then the staff's proposal about the special use permit would be the one to use. But if they were simply concerned about the expansive nature, I believe the Wake Forest one would cover that issue. And so that's why we said
You don't care.
approval of either.
Okay.
We presented the case to City Council. Are you going to present both these versions or just the one we adopt?
Well, I'm going to present the planning board's recommendation. I mean, as part of the staff report, they'll see that there was another proposal, but I will present the planning board's recommendation.
Well, with all due respect to Mr. McIntosh and his colleagues on the council, I have utmost confidence in my colleagues here, so I think we can handle this at planning board, and it doesn't have to go special use permit route. So I would certainly support the Wake Forest version, and if it's a problem down the road, we can always revisit it.
Well, that fits with the perspective. I read them separately and then sort of tried to step back and say, what are the goals of it? And for them to bring forward, to take restrictions sort of to head off issues, I think is a realistic way to do this. To add on top of that, not only do we want you to take these restrictions up front without any option of not having those additional scrutiny and permitting and time, I think it's an overkill for what the situation asked for that. So I would agree with Arnold.
So are you making a motion to adopt the
Yes,
Wake Forest?
make that motion.
Second by Mr. Leak. Okay. Any discussion?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just want to say that I take your point, Brenda, that and Mr. Morgan made that as well, that there hasn't been a huge lot of cases involving limited campus uses. But I do think that we need to look beyond that to the future and the possibilities of, expand all of these campuses. I think may one day want to do some more expansion. And we just have looked at a case, the Reynolds Stadium case, which was a planning board review. And I think we saw that there were a lot of issues that if this were a special use permit from the elected body, they could have worked out a lot of the problems that we saw. But we were hamstrung. We could not address those. So I think that there is value in bringing this to special use permit so that some of these, not to deny them the use. I'm not saying, that the outcome of the process should be to deny them the use. I'm saying that we should use this to work out these kinds of problems, these kinds of issues that do crop up. I mean, you never can tell what they are. So I do see value in combining these two, simply adopting the Wake Forest proposal with the approval process of special use permit with elected body review.
And if we were to do nothing, then we would just have what we have right now. We would just.
Right.
And, I have to say that, as a CEO of one of the campuses, if I had wanted to take over houses on Wendover Circle, which is right above the campus there, or on Arbor Road, which is right there, you better believe I would have wanted some kind of community discussion about it. And that's what I'm hearing from the neighborhoods, is there's not resistance to campuses building and doing things like that, but there is a level of desire to have a discussion when that is happening, and some way that the public can input in the process. And I don't know what the best way of that is, but I don't see it as reviews.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? We have a motion to approve the version submitted by Wake Forest. All in favor? Opposed? 2 opposed. Thank you. All right, we're to staff report.
Okay. First thing I want to talk about is, given that we had lots of email traffic coming, wanted to kind of talk a little bit about procedure that we should follow there. You saw Alan's email today about, hey, can we get a little bit more order about this, because it's uncertain on the day of the meeting that everyone, you all are busy people. You may or may not catch up with your emails before then, may not have time to. So the staff has been thinking about that too, in light of that, because we've been trying to figure out, okay, how do we respond to all these emails and get them to you, assure them that you are going to be able to at least get them, and do it in an orderly way so that it's not too chaotic for you. So what we've come up with that I'd like to suggest, and you all are the ones on the receiving end, so if you think differently, please let me know. But what I was going to suggest is a procedure that for comments, email comments from the public about a zoning case or anything else coming to the planning board, comes to us by 5 p.m. on the Wednesday before we release the book. So keeping in mind, we are putting together the book that week, and we're getting lots of pieces coming from lots of different places, and we've got to close up the book on Thursday so that we can get it to the printer and get it out in time to get to you and to the public. So if it's received before Wednesday at 5 p.m., close of business, the week the agenda book goes out, then it would be printed in the book, in your agenda. If it's after 5 p.m. Wednesday, but before the following 5 p.m. Wednesday, which is the day before this hearing, we will forward those emails to you. And then if it's after 5 p.m. that Wednesday, then we will print those emails we receive after 5 p.m. Wednesday and put them at your place here. If that sounds like a reasonable way of managing that so that you're not, at least you have the best chance of seeing what's there, we can operate. And what I would suggest is what we will, as a staff, do when we receive emails, we will have a standard response to that email that acknowledges that we received it, tells them we're going to pass it along to the planning board, but kind of repeats this procedure so that depending on when someone sent it, they will know by our response whether it fit how you're going to see it, in case they're wondering. But we would do that as kind of a standard response to them to acknowledge that we received it, and here's how we're going to handle it. So if that sounds reasonable to you, we can try that, or if you want to suggest we play with what I just said, we do that.
Paul, would it help y'all as a staff if we just cut out that last step? I don't know how much commotion and hullabaloo goes into the day of the meeting, you guys trying to print emails and get them to us, but I mean, I got here 15 minutes early today. We took 2 minutes to take a picture. I still didn't have time to read through all those emails. It seems like a waste of paper and staff time to do that last step.
I'm fine if you want to cut it off there. Now, in this case, we got the Neighborhood Alliance's proposal, alternate proposal for the UDO we just talked about, I think at 11:30 last night, so that.
We don't have surprise planning board meetings, though.
Right,
I mean,
right.
We just don't have any time to check it out, you know, whether you have any time to talk to somebody or find out whether there's any merit to, you know.
Well, you know, to me, I end up doing a whole lot of work for these meetings. And getting this book on Monday, which is generally what I do, unless I can access it by computer on Friday afternoon, is a task and a half. I mean, I don't know how many meetings I had to prepare for this meeting today. And last month it was even worse. And I know that the public, they really don't know the details of it until the agenda comes out. And then the word has to percolate out to citizens and things like that. And in the case of a review, how do you get anything in terms of what's going on or what the issues are unless you see something like that? And in other cases, I might say to the citizens, look, you can bring it to the meeting, and as you're talking, you can hand it out, because I think that's been policy in the past. But anything we can do to expedite that in a time of digital media seems to be reasonable. I think people have to realize, though, that if they get it into the late, there's a big chance that it's going to be read.
I'm glad you said it that way, because when I made the comment, I wasn't making it out of my own convenience. I was really making it on behalf of those who took the time to share their concerns, which I definitely appreciate. And to your point, the meeting is on the schedule. The issues that are going to be on the agenda are known early enough, I think, and the issues that even before you know it's on the agenda for this meeting, there are people who are concerned and are having conversations about it. So if I'm them, I want you all to know how I feel. So the sooner that people can do that, the better for them. Not just, I wasn't just complaining about having all these emails to read this morning.
A false sense of input. You know, I sent an email, and it's great because some of these people spend a lot of time thinking through the issue. You can tell by the way they wrote their email.
Absolutely.
It's not fair for them to think, I got my position out there when we're not going to get to read them until we get home tonight.
Yeah, I would support Mr. Grubbs. Have a cutoff at 5 p.m. the Wednesday before. Anything after that, they won't just show up here and tell us.
Jason, couldn't they do that just as well, though, in changing their response to people on that period of time and say, look, this has come after 5 o'clock on that. We cannot guarantee that the planning board members would have access or be able to read this. You're welcome to turn it in, though. Just go ahead and tell people you've got a problem. You're coming in too late.
Right. You know, it seems punitive to me to punish people for not meeting a deadline when what our goal here is that we get information. It's true that we will not get the ability to read and thoroughly digest something that's put at our places and we come in and we read it. But I wouldn't artificially cut off people. That just seems spiteful. I mean, there's really no point in that. And how hard is it to forward an email? I mean, if you get an email, forward it to the board is what I'm saying. And the other thing, I recall that there was maybe it was an informal procedure that Shelley followed, which was that if you get an email into her by 10 a.m. on the day of the meeting, she will forward it to the planning board members and make sure it gets put at their places. And that seemed to work fine. Now, there are cases where that does not work when you have a huge amount of public concern about something like this case. Now, that is an outlier case. I don't think we should adopt policy based on outlier cases. Normally, it works fine, and I am for just continuing the procedure that we've always followed.
I think with George's caveat of it may or may not get considered. You know, people just need to understand. That they may or may not have their voice heard if they're too late.
So we still provide it, but we give them a response for that very late arrival that this may or may not be able to be read by planning board members before the meeting.
I think that process would help me a lot, knowing what's come in, what hasn't, have I missed something, did I get this before and it's coming in again, and having, it creates an extra uncertainty of what I'm getting and is everything in, and do I need to keep checking my email every morning, the day of the hearing, to make sure I haven't missed something if I have time. I just don't always have the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's hard. A lot of times you don't know whether you want to express your opinion until you know what the staff opinion is. Because we vote for 99% of the time, we uphold the staff's recommendation. So, maybe something in between. But when is the agenda available? Friday afternoon? Okay.
Friday afternoon.
So that maybe, I'm just saying, is it proposed maybe wait until Monday or something like that? I really don't like getting, I think it's bad policy to get emails on Thursday, even Wednesday, with no time to investigate the merit of the claim in the email. And just like George mentioned today, he had 24 emails that he saw today, 5 minutes before the meeting started, that were opposed and 6 in favor. We actually, we put some merit, in that, and there's no way to know whether, a single or 2 individuals just really generated something that we then refer to and rely on when we're getting ready to cast our vote. So I would like to see us have a deadline prior to the day of the meeting, but maybe it's Monday. That would have given everyone an opportunity to think and compose over a weekend after the agenda were available. Maybe, and then once that deadline, maybe it's a full business day on Monday, I don't know, or until noon on Monday or something like that. And then after that,
I don't think it cuts people off because we have the hearing process here that people can bring.
Yeah, they can.
We sometimes
make their case.
Right,
Absolutely.
I agree with Melinda. I would not want to cut anyone off from giving us information that
They've
would
always
be useful.
Present whatever they want to present at the meeting.
we do sometimes have people who say I can't be here for a certain reason, but I want to let the planning board know how I feel.
Absolutely. Well, if you're comfortable with emailing up till 5 o'clock on Wednesday and then hard copies on Thursday, we can continue that if that's what.
That would be the closest to our informal practice of how we've done it that you were talking about, Melinda.
And I think Melinda's suggestion, just, you still want them emailed on Thursday instead of waiting to get the hard copy here? The ones that come in here Thursday morning, you want to email to you?
If we set the deadline of 10 a.m., you have to get your email to the planning staff by 10 a.m. And then we can decide whether that means that results in a hard copy or it just results in a forwarded email, whichever you think is.
On the day of.
On the day of, yeah.
How do you
think that's too late?
Well, I just think you have no opportunity for investigating, or vetting the.
I'm going to be honest. If it's sent to me the day of, it's not going to be read.
Yeah.
And be honest with the public about that.
Right.
People should know.
They should know.
That, but
Yeah.
I don't think we should curtail their ability to put the information
Well,
in.
it also makes our discussions a little bit awkward because Chris may have read an email that he assumes everybody else has read, that everybody on this end of the table has not, and then we're trying to figure out what Chris is talking. I mean, I know for a fact, and I know I'm new to the board, but that's happened where people referenced an email that we got handed right before the meeting, and I didn't get a chance to read it, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out what they're talking about.
But I really do feel like the most important thing for us is we should be as responsive as we can to citizen input. We should not try in any way, just for our own personal convenience, to cut things off. We need to make sure that we're as welcoming to the public interest as possible, the public concern.
I agree with that. However, people need to understand constraints. I do not have the ability. I know we got 2 emails this morning. All I saw was the subject line, and that's what made me respond. I didn't have time I wasn't even in town. So if the public knows that, if they have the ability to send it early, they will. If they don't have the ability to send it today, great. But they understand that it might not be read.
And Paul's going to have his response. He's going to tell those folks that sent it in this morning, it might not get read.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
And sign it,
We will.
Alan Younger.
All right.
Go for it.
Now, the rest of the staff report will be a lot quicker here. You all will be receiving an invitation from the Chamber of Commerce for a reception for the new CEO of the Mark Owens, who's coming to us from Greer, South Carolina. And that, just to give you a heads up on the date, but you will actually be getting an invitation from them. It'll be Tuesday, December 19th in the early evening. So just be on the lookout for that. Just wanted to give you a heads up on it. And then the December application deadline is this Monday. Can't tell you a whole lot right now. We've only gotten a couple of things in, so it may not be a heavy agenda, but it remains to be seen. And just FYI, the city council on Monday night adopted UDO 280. That was the buffer yard amendment, and that their action revised the type 2 buffer to the 15 feet. You know, we had recommended the possibility of narrowing that to 10 feet, but they went with the 15 that is there now. And that was otherwise they adopted it as brought through. And they also adopted the revised South Suburban Plan, which is now going to the county for consideration. And that is it for staff report.
Okay, good. Thanks, sir. Anything for the good of the order?
I have one question as a new member. So is there any protocol for responding to phone calls or emails that we should follow as planning board members? You know, I was really inundated with calls and emails, and, you know, one person took 45 minutes out of my professional day, and I just listened. Is there any protocol, any guidance?
I can tell you what I do. It's not anything official.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay. I respond, and I welcome them to come to this meeting and or send an email.
You respond as receiving their issue?
Yes.
Okay.
I also have, over the last 7+ years, have gotten phone calls and sometimes emails. I think it's fine that people do that. However, I'm not necessarily available to respond every time. There were some times in the early part of my time on this board that I did have those 45-minute phone calls, and I realized that wasn't really the best way to spend the time during my workday.
Well, I think that's my response always is, so that everybody that's going to participate can hear their information. They send something to everyone or come to the meeting, because that is part of what you want everybody to have the same information that you do. You're making a decision.
I do like that they want to talk to us about the issues and share the concerns. I'm not opposed to that at all. It's not always possible to have those conversations.
Thank you.
And I'll echo what Ms. Donegan said. I think we have to be responsive, and I attempt to answer the calls, respond to the emails, won't tell them how I feel about the case or anything, but just thank them for contacting me and encourage them to come and express their opinions here.
Perfect.
So, okay. Anything else? Anyone? Ms. Smith?
All right, let's motion to adjourn.
All right.
Stay
Unanimously approved.
December the 19th.